first of all, it's a great pleasure to have you back at Aalto University. And it wasn't that long ago since you were here last time. It was, I guess, early summer.
Just a quick question. Who was here in June?
Okay.
Oh, okay, so there's new blood in this audience. Good.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have another question. How many here are Aalto students? Okay, excellent. Because that was one of Linus's requests, that he really wants to talk to Aalto students, so I'm glad you are here. Now, if I now go to YouTube and actually search for Aalto University, so your recording actually comes up fairly high up at the top. So just you know, to pre-warn you.
Yes, there's no fingers this time.
Yeah. Okay. So this is also recorded. It's streamed live. So you know, let's hope or keep our fingers crossed that it's going to be equally fun and you know, exciting event. So that's one thing. Then couple of other things, like, let's say we are in the Open Innovation House, so some house rules and maybe also innovations. So we would like you to participate. There are several ways in which you can participate. And one of them is something called Screen.io, which is a startup from actually people who are working in this building from Helsinki Institute for Information Technology. So through Screen.io, everybody here can participate. We have the web address screen.io/Linus. So if you have anything that runs a browser, so just, you know, take it, use it. Right now you could log in. There is kind of a first question up there if you do. So please, you know, guys, put it up. So that's one thing. So we have various different ways for you to get engaged. Screen.io is one. Then we also reserved a hashtag, so if anybody is tweeting, so please use Linus EIT as the hashtag for this event. Then a third thing is that we have another kind of innovation from the Aalto University students. So this is something that's called a catchbox. And now, whenever anybody here wants to ask a question, what we will do is to throw you the mic. And so this is a microphone, and don't worry, it's not, you know, it's pretty soft. So no injuries so far. But anyway, so this is the mic that we are going to be passing around. And you can pass it back to us. I guess we will have, or Linus. Yeah. And we will, well, I guess there are no questions so far, so we will throw it to you when you have questions. But anyway, so that's another little piece of technology that has been developed by a startup here at Aalto University that we will use today. But I guess one of the nice things about being a moderator is that I have an advantage. I can ask you questions first.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that strikes me, and I kind of remember reading a book called Just for Fun about 10 years ago, which was about you and how you sort of, you know, started to do what you did and kind of what the motivation is behind. So now 10 years has gone, you know, and can you tell a little bit about, first of all, what do you currently do for Linux?
Yes.
And also what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated?
So these days what I do in Linux is I read email and I answer email and I apply patches, but more often I do just merge code from others. I haven't written code myself in a few years. I mean, I still write code, but the kind of code I write is simple fixes for stupid mistakes others make. So most of the time, my actual code contributions tend to be one-liners or two-liners. And what I really do is just merge code from the thousands of actual developers and try to make it easy to get code into the kernel by being approachable and being available pretty much every day, so that people don't have to wait for me as a technical lead. And that's how we, I mean, on average over the last year, I did the statistics. Every day we average about 170 change sets. We have 13 merges. A lot of them are done by me every single day, on average over the last year. 15,000 lines changed. To put that in perspective, when I started and made the first Linux kernel release, the whole kernel was 10,000 lines of code. Now we do 15,000 lines of changes every single day, and as a result, the kernel is slightly bigger. We're about 16 million lines of code in 40,000 files. So I kind of act as a manager, but as a technical manager for the whole project, and do very little coding anymore. The coding I tend to do on other projects, smaller pet projects of mine, and on the kernel I'm this boring manager person. There was another. Oh,
what keeps you motivated in doing it? Or is it those pet projects then, or?
No, the pet projects are kind of fun, but they are side projects. What keeps me motivated is I used to start out as a pure programmer and actually writing the code myself. And that is still fun, and I still do it on the smaller projects. But it turns out that even though I'm a geek, I actually really enjoy the social interaction. I enjoy cursing at people when they make mistakes. I like the back and forth. I like the arguments. It really motivates me to be part of a very vocal community. We have a lot of engineers with a lot of ego, and it's really exciting to just participate in that. So we do have technical discussions, and not all of them are cursing, but that kind of does add spice to your life.
So it's the communities, the people who
It is the communities,
behind
it's
Linux.
the communication, yes.
Great, okay. Maybe now we could show the kind of results of the warm-up thing. It was about which is your favorite platform. So, okay.
Well, that's a big surprise.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's slight self-selection at work here.
Well, anyway, there's a lot of fans around. That's good. On the other hand, and this was kind of my second question, but and I would perhaps not have put it exactly like this, but since it came up from the audience, so let's move straight there. So, I mean, we are now in Finland, and of course, you know, Linux as an operating system is in the middle of a very, very interesting technology battle between different mobile platforms.
Oh, this is the Nokia question?
And this is the Nokia question, exactly.
Christ.
Exactly, and I would not have put it like this. Somebody from the audience put it like this. But anyway, I guess the question is broader than, you know, what is Nokia and Microsoft doing. I guess from my side, the question would have been that, well, how important do you see the role of operating system, and why do you think that Linux really now has all the ingredients? Oh, I assume that you think that. So that the Linux-based systems will be the ones that will win the mobile battle.
Yes, I'm not going to answer the Nokia question. There is no upside for me. I'm like, whatever, don't even ask me.
Good.
It has been very interesting to see Linux on cell phones for a few reasons. One has been a purely technical side, which is the low power capabilities have often been driven by the cell phone people. So over the last few years, one of the things we've had to battle in the kernel have been power management, and that has been largely, I mean, it has somewhat been driven by laptops, but the cell phones have been a huge part of it. The other part that I really enjoy about how popular Linux has been in cell phones, thanks to mainly Android, is just that it's also shown that Linux is actually very capable of being this rich user interface that normal people interact with. It used, I mean, before Android, there had been people trying to do Linux on cell phones more or less successfully, mostly less. But people used to feel that, hey, user interfaces and actual like consumer products was not something Linux was necessarily famous for. And Android changed that. I think perception-wise, it has been very important and made a lot of companies aware that even if you don't use Android, and a lot of people are using Android, I think it has made Linux more acceptable in certain areas as a consumer interface. And that's interesting. I think it's a very important area.
Yeah, agree. So. Okay, so now I think it's time for first question from the audience. So who wants to start? And Linus can throw the catch box.
Wow.
No, come on. Please.
Oh.
There.
Thank you. I'm from Applied Mathematics. So easy question to begin. About mathematics, do you have something that you should have read while you were studying for the students? What you suggest they should read? And what is something that you found out later that this is very useful?
I don't know. So when I was at Helsinki University, and for the first years, I actually did more math than computer science at Helsinki University. And I'm not aware of directly having used any of the math I took. I mean, but I actually took a lot of very theoretical courses. I mean, set theory, algebra 2, I mean, things that were about concepts and not so much about numerical stuff. And having never maybe used those things directly, I think the model of thinking is actually really important. And for example, the other project that is not nearly as well known as Linux, but the other projects I've been involved with, Git, I think having a mathematical mind and a model of thinking and sets and doing these kind of things is very important for a programmer. Just even if you don't use the math directly, I really enjoyed math. In fact, the reason I did computer science as my major at the university was that I felt that it was more likely that I could get a job as a computer science major than as a math major, but math was actually my main interest. And I think it's a useful skill to have. So all the people who clapped because you hate math, you're wrong, right? But
great. Next question. Okay, not with the catch box.
Wow,
right now.
You're much worse than the Helsinki University students.
Well, that's not good. That's not good.
There's a question there now.
Yeah. Back there.
Close enough.
And keep it close to your mouth because that's better. Yeah? Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, have you teach your kids to program, and how do you feel about that?
So I have 3 daughters, and the eldest one is just about to turn 16, and so far none of them have shown any interest whatsoever in programming. It's sad, but there you have it. They are much more interested in Facebook and things like that. I suspect none of them will be engineers. I did try to kind of encourage them, but my problem is I'm a really bad teacher. I get upset and frustrated if you don't immediately understand what I'm trying to tell you. That probably scares my kids away more than it actually makes them want to learn programming. So at some point I just realized I'd better just stop even trying.
Okay. Any more questions now? Here, Zaira.
Good throw. Hey. fundamental discipline is programming most like? I really don't know. I would assume it's more like architecture or building a bridge or really engineering, not so much the sciences in general. But it's hard for me to really even say. And I'd much rather answer your second question because I think I can answer that one. The most important thing you should keep in mind when building something new is to not think you're going to change the world and not over-design and not make it something huge and big and completely different from what has gone before. It's nice to think that somebody has one great big idea and will apply that idea to make the world a better place, and that's not how the world actually works. I mean, I've been involved in many projects, but all of them have started from very pedestrian routes, trying to solve a particular problem I had. And some of them never got any further, but the successful ones, when I had solved my problem, somebody else came around and said, hey, that almost solves my problem too. And they grew from the fact that they started small, but the roots and the basics were good enough that they could grow. But don't try to aim for the moon. I mean, I did not start Linux thinking I would take over the world, but we're almost there now, right?
Oh, that's one. I actually had one here, and I would like to. Well, open source to you, is it mainly the way to get good programs, or do you think that open source as such, as an idea, has broader value?
So, to me personally, the big advantage of open source is it's so much more fun and so much more interesting to work together with other people and be able to work together with anybody. I mean, I've done closed source programming. I worked for a company that did software, and I did proprietary software too, and I really enjoyed that as well. But just doing it in an open community and allowing anybody to be involved, really, when it works, it is so much fun. It's the whole social interaction, the whole different viewpoints. The fact that inside a company, usually you have a vision of where you go. And that's boring. It's much more interesting to have a project like Linux where you don't have a vision. It's like everybody has their own vision. And sure, there's some overlap, but there's a lot of non-overlap too. One of the strengths of Linux, I think, has been the fact that you have the people who do cell phones, but you also have the people who do supercomputers. And trying to balance this out has been a great joy. So to me, from a personal standpoint, it's just that the development is much more interesting in open source. There are lots of other advantages. I think that from a conceptual standpoint, the scientific method is really important, and the way to make real progress on complicated issues is to have lots of people work together and being able to build on each other's work. I quote Newton. My favorite quote is, "If I have seen further, it has been by standing on the shoulders of giants." And he was talking about physics and science, but I think the same is absolutely true in technology too, that most real technological innovation is not about this great new idea. It's about taking incremental improvements on top of existing technology, and just over years and over decades, you turn what used to be a really clunky car into what we have today. And again, open source is kind of the scientific model for computer science. And I think that's important. Then there's the whole free software standpoint, which just thinks that open source is important for moral reasons. And I find that to be an intriguing and interesting standpoint, even though I tend to disagree with it. But it's interesting how there are so many different people doing open source for so many different reasons. both technical and personal. And I think that's a real strength.
Great. I think there was a question there. Yeah.
Oh.
Just most good technologies need to evolve quite quickly. What part of the kernel is evolving the fastest, and in what way?
So I actually have to say that most of the individual parts evolve pretty slowly, sometimes excruciatingly so, that you'd like to make much faster progress. And what happens is that you just make small incremental improvements to any particular part. And the explosive growth of Linux has actually not been that any particular area of the kernel tends to develop very quickly. It's been because there's 8,000 different people and they're working on different parts of the kernel. And that's how, when you look at any small detail, things can take years to mature. But then when you look at the whole thing, it turns out that over a single week, a lot of things change. So you have both slow progress, but then global fast progress at another level. I was hugely, for example, frustrated with all the power management work we did. It took us years. And it's actually fairly common when you have something that crosses boundaries. Power management, especially for cell phones, but it was true in laptops too. You have to have a scheduler. You have to have the I/O is very important for power management. All the drivers, and we support thousands of different hardware, they all have to get the power management right. The PCI layer has to get it right. There's a lot of different components, and it took a long time, and it was very frustrating. So sometimes you have these really slow things, and then people say, oh, but you develop things so fast. It's true. In one sense, we're good. In other sense, we're no faster than anybody else.
So actually, it looks like that we hear the catch box here quite well, but the people in the stream don't. So whenever you get a question, Linus, can you just repeat it? Repeat it. But yeah, next one here.
No questions already taken, so I would like to ask the Google question. Because the touch also Android already, which is dominated by Google. It's an open source operating system, but Google has commercial interests.
Yep.
Do you think there's room for a big-scale initiative for a not-for-profit organization to run a mobile OS, probably Linux-based, other than Android?
So the question was if I think there's space for a not-for-profit space operating system like Android, but not Android.
Yes.
I have to say it's really hard to develop a whole distribution. I mean, it's a ton of work, and even though I absolutely love the whole grassroots effort of open source, and we've had most of the kernel work has been done by like individuals that are just excited about the technology. The fact that we've had companies involved has been very important, because it turns out, especially making a product, I don't know what it is, but you almost need the kind of direction that a company has. And I think that's been one of the successes of Linux, has been how Linux was one of the first open source projects that was very open to commercial use of the open source code. And I think it's very hard to do something like Android without the backing of a company and without the focus of somebody who has a particular goal in mind. And I do think that commercialism, even though some people think it's crass and bad, it does help drive direction a lot. I'm not saying it's impossible to have a kind of community-driven Android alternative. I'm just saying it's hard.
Thanks. Before we go there and there, so one from the stream. So what do you think about the kind of upcoming open hardware movement and then its link to Linux?
So I don't know about upcoming. People have been trying to do open hardware for the longest time. There's been many projects trying to do open hardware. And open hardware is hard because software, anybody can be involved, and all you need is a computer and a development environment, and you don't have any other costs. Open hardware, sure, you can do the design that way. Let's say if you're creating a new CPU or a new graphics chip or something, but in the end, somebody needs to actually create the piece of hardware itself. And aside from 3D printing, which is obviously coming in a big way, that's still very much not something that you can do as an individual or even as a medium-sized company. What I find more interesting is not necessarily open hardware, but really cheap hardware. So all these projects where, I mean, if you count something like Raspberry Pi as open hardware, then I do find those interesting because I think when hardware is really cheap and really widely available, that kind of changes some of the economics of things. But open hardware in the sense that it was openly designed seems to still be some way off.
Right. Okay, then back. That's going to be a hard throw, Udo.
Hi, I'm from NRC. I would like please to explain us your methodology you follow when you merge code from others. From the step when you check the code of others.
I actually have a hard time hearing.
Can you keep it a little bit closer to your mouth because we have hard time
Yes,
hearing.
if you can please share with us your methodology you follow when you merge code from other developers.
So your methodology when you do actually the code mergers, and how do you manage all that?
I'm a huge believer in not micromanaging others and trusting people. So most of the code I accept not because I look at each piece of code, because quite frankly there's no way I could do that. I mean, go back to the 15,000 lines change every day. If I even tried to actually watch the code itself, I would go crazy. What happens is, over the years, I've created a network of people I trust. It's kind of the way people work in general. You have close friends and you know how they work, and after a while, you watch the code they generate or the code they accept, and you just say, hey, I trust that person. He's the expert in his sub-area. To a degree where in many cases, I have a very good overview of the kernel itself, but in many sub-areas, I am by no means the expert on that area. So the people I trust are often better than me for that code. So I would be stupid to then try to micromanage them and try to look at the code and overly get involved in checking what they did. That would just waste my time. It would waste their time too. That said, and this is why I'm known as being not very nice and I'm cursing a lot of people, is I don't ever get involved when things go smoothly, right? When somebody has made a mistake and accepted code they really shouldn't have accepted, that's when I have to step in and people start mailing me and saying, hey, you broke the kernel and the last release doesn't work at all. And then I start cursing at people and saying, what the hell? I trusted you. You clearly should not have done this to me. And so quite often I get involved later on and look at this code and say, Christ, this is ugly, horrible code. How could you ever accept this? And that's the kind of involvement I often have, which is mostly negative, which can be, I mean, somewhat not good at times. I mean, people really do. I mean, some people really think I'm a grumpy old man. And I realized that if you only see my flames and my curses and not the private discussions where when things go well, you think I hate everybody. And some days that's almost true, right? But I mean, I still check code from people I don't trust. But I do have the closest 10, 15 developers. When they send me code, I say, I trust you. I'm not going to waste both of our times by trying to second guess your decision.
Thanks.
Great. Well, there was a previous Screen I/O question on your management style, and I think we covered that pretty well here as well. Anyway, next question here at the front.
Halfway.
I think you need to pass.
Nice one.
Yeah.
I was actually having a question about hardware vendors and how do they affect the development of the Linux kernel, and what are their responsibilities if they want to have good support for Linux?
So there's so many different hardware vendors, and some are great and some are not so great. And at this talk, maybe I should concentrate on the good ones, right? Because there are hardware vendors who do a really good job. I mean, the best example is probably Intel. That is a big hardware vendor. They don't do just CPUs, they do networking too, both wired and wireless. They do a lot of different things. And they have been very active in not just sending us drivers and documentation, but several of the main maintainers of the kernel actually work for Intel. So Intel basically said, hey, you're maintaining this sub area, let us pay you to maintain it for us. And that's an example of a hardware vendor who has done pretty much everything right. It took them some time. I mean, when I moved to the Silicon Valley, I actually, maybe the first year, I gave a talk at Intel, and at that point, Intel engineers were not allowed to participate in the Linux kernel mailing list discussions using an intel.com email address. That was a hard rule inside of Intel saying, no, you must never, ever tell anybody that you work for Intel, because if you do something bad, we don't want our name besmirched by your actions, right? But over the years, they have become one of the best, if not the best, hardware vendors. There's a whole spectrum of really bad vendors that I won't name again to what's often most painful is hardware vendors who realize that Linux is actually important to their particular piece of hardware. And they put engineers to work in writing a driver for, let's say, a network card. And they write this driver completely internally without talking to anybody else around it, and then they send that driver to us. And in particular, Greg, who's the maintainer of the driver tree, and most of those drivers are horrible. They're really nasty. Even if they work, the code quality is so bad that nobody can actually read it. And it was all done within the company that does the hardware, so nobody else has any documentation for it. You have bad code, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If something breaks, nobody can help fix it. So that's the kind of situation where clearly the hardware company tried to do the right thing, but because they never interacted with the community at all, except here, take this driver, it ends up being really painful for everybody. And then we have people like Greg, he's a saint. I don't understand how because he works with a lot of these companies who are actually nice and pleasant people and try to convince these hardware companies to, please, we realize you're trying your best, but this sucks. And it can take years to get the kind of back and forth real community interaction going. Things are getting better. I mean, they are getting so much better. It used to be that we had almost no support for any hardware company. And these days, a lot of hardware companies often give us drivers even before they even release the hardware. So things are much nicer now, but it's been a teaching experience on both sides.
Great. Now, again from online. So this is more about desktop distributions and Windows managers and you know, state of GNOME and so forth. So you know, first of the question was that where do you think that desktop Linux is, and about the current distributions, how it's going, and then the also, you know, there was an explicit question that what do you use yourself?
So clearly the question was meant because I'm fairly well known for not liking some of the things that the desktop people have been doing. I have to say, things are so much better now than they were 1 year ago. I am actually back to using GNOME 3, and I don't like some of the things they did, but they have been fixing issues. It has been getting less painful. They have extensions now that are still much too hard to find, but with extensions you can make your desktop look almost as good as it used to look 2 years ago. But there is a certain amount of frustration in that very sentence that I think the desktop, which was getting fairly good on Linux, regressed for a few years. And that was very frustrating, since the desktop has always been the part I personally use, I personally care most about, and was the original target for Linux. We've been very successful in cell phones and servers and pretty much everywhere else, but the desktop is clearly a very hard nut to crack, and for a while it got harder rather than better.
Okay. Well, I'll take one more from here and then continue. So going back to mobile Linux, so of course it's not only the story of Android, and there are all kinds of other things going on. Of course, we have memories of Maemo Amigo, and then people are asking now about Yolla. Have you followed that
They're the
company?
Amigo
they are
resurrection company.
Yeah,
I haven't really followed it. I'm hopeful that they will be successful and that there will be a plan B, and maybe Yolla is going to be able to do that plan B. It's been interesting. I mean, Android clearly is very dominant in that space, but there are companies working Amigo and working Tizen. Asia in particular and Korea has noticed that they used to be just hardware manufacturers, and partly thanks to Linux, some of these companies that used to create hardware for software that other people wrote have now been able to say, hey, we can actually control our own destiny and write our own software on top of Linux, and they are getting very involved too. And I think that's been one of the nice things about open source, how it allows all these different parts of the ecosystem to realize that, hey, I can actually be involved. So I was in Korea 2 weeks ago and talked to Samsung and LG people, and they seem to be very interested also, and they are a bit nervous about Android because they're not Google. Right? They want to also maybe do their own operating system just because they want to be in control.
Right. Yeah.
So there's many of these going on, and maybe Yolla will convince Nokia to rethink their stance.
Well, we have perhaps some Nokia people in the audience as well. Sailfish is, by the way, the name of the distribution that Yolla is working on. So,
okay.
you know,
but it is Migo based. Right?
It's Migo, but they just renamed their own version. Okay, next question. Where's the catch box? There, you have it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Is GR security coming to the kernel? This is the first question. Or the second is, how are you prioritizing between security fixes and fixes for more usability? And the third one is, you just mentioned that the desktop system is so important for yourself. Do you think you will accept like kernel patches like PF sources, which actually make like I/O much more fluently working with Linux? So these are my questions.
That's 3 different questions. GR security and security patches. A lot of GR security has actually made it into the kernel. The lot that has made it into the kernel is the sane part. Security people are sometimes a bit black and white. And by that, I mean crazy. Security people think that every problem is either a security problem or not worth thinking about. And that is incorrect. The most secure systems are systems that nobody wants to use because they're a pain in the ass. And a lot of security people seem to want to drive their system in that direction because then it's really secure. So my standpoint has been that I do not want to make a huge distinction between security patches and other patches. This is not just about security, by the way. A lot of people seem to think that performance problems are different from correctness problems. And again, I disagree. Performance problems are real problems, exactly the same as correctness problems. I do not want to distinguish performance patches from patches that fix some correctness issue. And I don't want to distinguish that from security things. A good system is a balanced system, and security is part of it, but security is by no means more important than anything else. Security is important, but it's not the question. And a lot of security people are, I mean, they have blinders on, and they're too one-dimensional. And the fact that I'm not sometimes irritates them. I call security people bad names sometimes because some of those people really are expletive morons, really. I mean, sometimes they're very smart people, but they're not thinking straight. And GR Security has had a lot of good patches, but they have had a few patches that basically say, hey, we can break compatibility because we want to make things more secure. Never mind that nobody wants to use the end result. What was the second question? Wow.
You want to repeat?
The other one was about PF sources and the I/O scheduling. That is like working well for servers, but has disadvantages on desktop systems.
We've had many situations where, and this is kind of the same issue, where a certain particular niche wants to create kernel patches that work really well for that small area. And even when that small area is the desktop, it turns out I'm not willing to do that. So for example, some of the scheduler patches, some of them worked really well on 2 and 4 CPU machines and just did not scale at all past that point. And if all you care about is 2 and 4 CPU machines, you're saying, hey, this code is working much better for me, why don't you take it? And I'm like saying, I'm sorry, but one of the points of Linux is you have to be able to balance all these different areas. And we generally have been able to do so. So for example, when we added support for SMP, and SGI was creating patches to support their 4,000 CPU monster machines, the initial patches were completely unusable for anybody else. They were these hacky things that made it work really well on their big machines, but they were not something we could use on small machines. And I basically told them, I'm not taking that. In order for you to merge your stuff back, you must write them in such a form where your patches work for everybody else too. And they did. And the thing about that is it actually made the end result much better. It made it much better for us, but it turns out it even made it better for the SGI people. They cleaned up a lot of the assumptions they had done. And some of the projects you mentioned seem to have, again, these blinders on where they're saying, we only care about our small world, and we don't care about the fact that we're making things worse for others. And if you have that kind of approach, then you shouldn't be surprised when I'm not interested in the patches you sent me. So people need to be able to balance things out. And sometimes you can do that with tunables, but I prefer code that just works. and works well on small machines and on big machines. And it is possible, but it takes a lot more effort.
Next, here.
Yeah, well, there was the talk about like Android breaking the barrier of Linux on like regular users. So what is your opinion on Valve's work with NVIDIA and Intel improving the open source drivers with the goal of releasing the Steam gaming platform on Linux? So is the year of the desktop Linux finally coming?
Well, if Valve actually really, I mean, and it's probably not an if, it's a when Valve actually releases their client for Linux, that's certainly going to help desktop Linux a lot, because one area that a small but fairly vocal group of people care about is games, and Linux has not been very strong on games. I was not directly personally involved with the Valve group, but I talked to kernel developers who were, and they were very impressed by the Valve people. And apparently it was mutual. They, both sides actually really enjoyed working together with each other. The Linux kernel, and not kernel, also the OpenGL stack in user space, people were really happy to see real world cases of high performance graphics, 3D graphics, and being able to also look at the source code that Valve used for their game engine, and were able to say, oh, you don't actually care about being fast in this case, you care about being fast in that case. And that helped the OpenGL and kernel side. It turns out apparently the same was true the other way, where some of the Valve people were really happy to work with the open source people because they could see, oh, that's why this is never going to be fast, because you need to do all these crazy things. So there was, the people I talked to were actually very happy with the whole back and forth there. And it does apparently mean that we'll have good gaming on Linux, not in the not too distant future.
Great. Next.
You seem to be getting a lot of things done. How do you go about beating procrastination? How do you avoid watching cat videos all day?
Oh, I actually don't have that problem. Well, I do in certain areas. The reason I don't watch cat videos every day is because I don't find them to be as interesting as the technical emails I get. So I don't have problem with procrastination just because I actually think my work is really, really interesting. And when I wake up in the morning, my office is above our garage. I have to walk up the stairs. I have to, I mean, it's 50 meters away, not quite. In order to not have to do that, by the bed, I have a tablet. So when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I usually do is I use the tablet to just check what email is going on, right? Just so that I don't even have to work to my office to see what's going on. So that's one reason I don't have a problem with procrastination. Then in other areas, I'm not so good. So one of the reasons I don't do slides and I don't do speaking is if I'm forced to give a talk, I invariably procrastinate until 5 minutes before the talk, and then I realize I have no time to make slides anymore because I just can't force myself to be interested. So it depends. The way to avoid procrastination is to find something you love doing so much that you just won't put it off.
That's good. A little bit related. Well, first of all, there was a very early question, but do you like cats? I've always had a, well, always. I've had a cat most of my life, and we still have another cat. We also have a dog, we have a snake, we've had several gerbils, hamsters, rabbit, fish I really despise. But we've had, in our family, we've had pretty much any animal you can think of, we've had it at some point or other. Cats and dogs are my favorite. Great.
But not videos. I mean, the whole point of having a pet is to, the unconditional love in the case of dogs and the I don't know what in the case of cats.
Well, back to this question, still sort of, how much do you work during a day? And then there was another one that, have you actually ever played Angry Birds on a Linux machine?
I've played Angry Birds. Mainly, I used to play Angry Birds when I was waiting to pick up the kids from gymnastics or something like that. It's a great program for, you have 15 minutes to kill because gymnastics is running late, and then you play Angry Birds on your cell phone. What was the first
how
question?
Much,
how much?
Do you count the hours? How many hours?
I don't count the hours.
You just don't count the hours.
And I can actually do most of my work. I can do even while traveling. So, as long as I have Wi-Fi on my laptop, I obviously can read email. Doing big, painful merges is inconvenient while traveling, just because it's just small keyboard, bad internet connection, not enough CPU power to compile the whole kernel like that. So I try to avoid doing the merge window while I travel, although it actually happened last merge window. But today, for example, when I got up, I try to spread it out over the day. So I did 3 or 4 merges this morning. When I get back, well, this evening I probably won't do merges, but I may be able to do them at the airport tomorrow morning when I leave, in case I find free Wi-Fi at Helsinki airport. So
they have it.
They do have it.
They
do
have it.
Good.
Well, maybe going back to a little bit more technical side of that answer is that there was a question on the growing complexity of Linux kernel. What's your view on?
It's a huge problem. Especially certain areas are getting so complicated that we only have a few people who actually understand them.
Yeah.
The VM is at that point now that we have certain areas where there's like a handful of people who really know the code well enough to be able to judge patches. The good news is when you're that core, there are not that many patches. It's not the area where you have 100 patches a day. You might have 100 patches over one release. So it's still manageable. It is slightly more fragile than I'd like it to be, but none of the areas are in the situation where it's so complicated that nobody dares touch it anymore. I mean, we've been able to avoid that problem, but some of the areas are esoteric enough that we only have a few people who are competent in that area.
Okay. Next question. Here.
Yeah. Do you always wear those round-shaped glasses?
No, that's an odd question. I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. Actually, for almost 10 years, I wore no glasses at all. I had LASIK, so I can actually see you guys even without the glasses. Before LASIK, my vision was so bad that I couldn't recognize my own kids in a swimming pool, and that's kind of embarrassing if you start grabbing the wrong kid. I wear whatever glasses my wife picks out for me.
Good. Another, let's say, more family-related question. So why aren't you writing the Torvalds family blogspot.fi anymore?
I don't think it was ever blogspot.fi.
I don't know.
I tried the blogging thing. I did it for maybe a couple of months, and it got to the point where I just got self-conscious about writing what I was doing. So now for the last maybe year, I've been using Google+, and if I see something really odd, I might take a picture of it and post it on Google+, or I've posted a few programming questions, actually. I've posted a few rants because, hey, it's what I do. But I'm not actually all that interested in the whole blogging thing.
Another question before we go back there. So this is about failing, and any examples of where you think you failed, and or you would like to share with the audience of the learnings that you had from a failure?
On the technical side, there's been many cases where I've made the wrong decision, but that has usually not been a failure. It's been, okay, I made the wrong decision. As long as I'm ready to admit it and undo it and do the right one, who cares? I mean, we went down the wrong direction for a while. We've had that happen. I'd like to be a nicer person, certainly. I'd like to curse less at people and be slightly more encouraging people to grow instead of telling them they're idiots. I'm sorry, I've tried, it's not within me. It's like, I get frustrated at times, and then I like the fact that we have different personalities in the kernel too. We have a lot of them are strong personalities, where strong doesn't necessarily mean good, but we have people who specialize in guiding new people through the process because they actually like doing that, and I've never been that kind of person. So that may be a failure.
There was a question back there. Do you want to try to give it a thought?
Where? Oh, I'm not going to hit that. Just try to catch it and
good throw.
Close enough.
All right. So I thought I'd ask what's your view on systemd. So we know that it does many nice things like isolation and a parallel startup of services, but then there's also some criticism, like it breaks the Unix philosophy of doing one thing nicely and then programs interacting together. So do you have any opinion on this one?
So I think systemd is
Linus,
interesting.
do you want to repeat?
Okay. Yeah. The question was my opinion about systemd and how some people feel it breaks the Unix philosophy, and it's just different. I don't know how many people care here. Systemd is kind of the replacement for the traditional init model, and it tries to take over a lot of other kind of process startup things in general. I actually like a lot of what systemd does. My personal biggest issue with systemd is the people involved seem to think that change is good for its own sake. I've seen Leonard Pottering, for example, talking about how something is bad because it's something that has been done for 30 years, and old is by definition bad, which makes no sense at all to me, because I'm saying, if it's been working for 30 years, it's clearly doing something right, right? This is my standpoint. While some of the systemd people seem to have the exact opposite, which is saying, if it's been working that way for 30 years, it's about time we changed it. And that mentality to me makes me very nervous. They seem to sometimes make changes for the sake of changes and worry less about what people are used to, and trying to kind of, that's probably why systemd has generated so much negative feedback, because it takes people out of their comfort zones and doesn't feel bad about that at all. And at the same time, I think a lot of what it does is interesting. So I'm a bit nervous about the development model and the willingness to break things, which I think is a huge mistake. But I do think that it's showing a lot of promise.
All right, thank you.
There's a question back there, and then here.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, hi. Just a personal question. How exactly did you feel when you won the Millennium Technology Prize? And if I could be so adventurous, what did you do with the money?
So it's hard to explain how you feel when you win a prize. I mean, obviously, it's a really great thing to get a prize for anything. It's a recognition, and the Millennium Prize was actually a lot of money. So far, what I've done with the money, I've paid taxes on it, right? Not a lot else. We had Right now, we don't have many plans. One of the things the prize money means is that I may not care horribly much about money, but not caring about money also means not liking to worry about money. And I had money set aside for the kids' education, which in the US is really expensive. The Millennium Prize means, in particular, that there's one less thing to worry about, right? And I'm hopeful that the kids will come to Helsinki University or Aalto University, and we won't waste any money on an education. And in this case, I can use the money on hookers and blow or something. I don't know. Okay, you should probably not.
That's gone. That's gone.
But the point is, right now it's there so that I don't have to worry about it. Not that I had to worry a lot about money before. I mean, I'm doing okay.
Good. There.
Thank you for being here, Linus. And I have two questions. One is a little broader, and another one which is specific. The one that I like to know about your personal feeling about the personal computing in the future, let's say in 5-10 years. And do you agree with Steve Jobs, which he said it will be trucks and cars, that concept? And my specific question is regarding the unification of operating systems. How important is it to have a unified operating system between PC, tablets, and other form factors? Thank you.
Okay, so the question about technology in 5 to 10 years, I don't actually really care. I think technology is interesting, but I think technology is interesting mainly because it's this toy and it keeps changing and there's always something new. So the thing I'm actually looking forward in the 5 to 10 year time scale is we're reaching the limits of physics when it comes to just shrinking processes. And I actually think that's really going to be fun and interesting because it's going to have to, it's going to mean that the industry is going to have to change. The people who are used to computers getting twice as fast or using half the power every 18 months are going to have to change how they work, and that's going to cause a change in the whole industry, and I think that's actually exciting and it's going to be really interesting. I don't think you're going to have cars versus trucks, that you'll have small stuff and big stuff. I think you'll continue to see this continuum and more of the ubiquitous stuff, that it's just going to be computers everywhere. And I actually do think that it's important to have a system that spans the whole ecosystem. One of the things we've done surprisingly well, and I didn't actually believe we'd do that, is the fact that we can, and Linux is the only kernel who actually runs from cell phones to supercomputers, and it really is the same source base. Everybody else has been doing, like Apple is obviously doing OS X on the bigger side and then iOS on the smaller side, and they're not unified. And and Microsoft did the same thing. We've seen that there are huge benefits to have the same source code across the whole spectrum, because it means that things that only used to matter in the mobile space used to be things like power management. And we spent a lot of time on power management for mobility. It turns out you go to any server room in the world today that is getting built, and power use is, if not number one, it's number 2 on the list of things people care about. And these kinds of things, 5-10 years ago, people weren't even thinking about it that much. I mean, some people were, but it was not widely recognized. And having a common base means that you get all these different inputs, and if you're able to cover the whole spectrum, it's actually a really powerful technical tool to be flexible, so that you can care about power on big computers. We did SMP for servers and supercomputers. And on the desktop, people were running single CPUs. On cell phones, people weren't even imagining SFP 10, 15 years ago. Today, you can't buy a cell phone with only one CPU. Well, you can if you buy a Windows cell phone. But any non-Windows cell phone will have 2 or 4 CPUs in it, right? Modern. So it's like, it's very common that you find these things that you think matter only for one area, and it turns out, no, they don't. They actually matter across the whole spectrum. So I think it's been very useful for Linux to have this broad base.
Well, I think that's an excellent answer from somebody who says that you don't care about the future of IT. Also, well, reminds me on, you know, all of these connections of power management, for example. 1/3 of the web servers in the world run Linux.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy consumption of those servers is astounding. And I mean, you can save a few, I mean, not building a couple of nuclear power plants just by doing a better
I mean, right
Linux.
now, I mean, I don't know what the situation is in Finland, but I know that in the US, when people build big server facilities, they tend to build them close to, for example, power plants, and especially around water plants where they can get cheap power year-round. So it's interesting how important power management has become for the server business.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is fairly recent. I mean, really, it's in the last few years, it's become something that is their sometimes #1 concern.
I will actually throw one of mine in the middle here. So now, okay, 5 to 10 years, what do you think will be the biggest thing for Linux? I mean, the big new things that are behind the corner.
I don't think that way. I really don't. I plan 1 or 2 release cycles ahead. So for Linux, that means 3 to 6 months ahead. I do get access to early hardware. I also get access to people who tell me what their plans are 2 years down the line, right? I can't talk about those, but it means that when we make releases and look at code, a lot of the kernel developers do, we kind of have something of a window what will happen in the near future and say, okay, this code makes sense, or no, this is a bad idea because 2 years from now, if we do this, we'll be doing the wrong thing. But I don't have a 5-year plan. And in most of our kernel work is really, it's new hardware and it's new usage cases. So we're being driven from outside by both hardware companies and by companies who use Linux. And it's been very interesting, but it means that I'm not a visionary. I don't like the word visionary. I don't plan 5 years ahead. I don't think it works. We are reactionary. We try to do the best thing we can with a fairly short time frame for the future plans.
Good. Great. Next question here.
Oh.
Yeah, hi. Do Google, Facebook, and Samsung pay your insurance bills?
My insurance bills? Well, no. But they do fairly directly actually pay my salary. So the way I'm getting paid is I'm an employee of the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation is a non-profit group that gets paid by Google, Intel, Samsung, and so on. So they do pay my salary. They do pay, for example, it's not direct, I guess it actually is a kind of insurance. They also pay the Linux Foundation legal department. So if somebody were to sue me or Linux, I don't have to worry about them suing me directly. There's some legal department that will step in. It doesn't happen, really. I mean, why would you sue me? You sue big companies that have lots of money. Right?
As a follow-up, what about your role as the lead of Linux development? So what do you think in the future?
My role in Linux development? It's actually been fairly stable for the last few years. We've found a model that works really well. We used to have a feature-driven release model, and we used to have a source control managed model that didn't really work very well, and there was a lot of problems with both of those. Over the years, we've found what works and what doesn't, and we have both a release model and a management model that seems to be scaling really well. So the throughput of development has actually gone up. So we have more patches coming in, we have more changes coming in, and we're keeping on top of it. And it really seems to work. And who knows, maybe there's some problem coming up in the next few years, which means that we'll have to change our model again, and that's really, really painful. Some of the most painful changes we've ever done in the kernel have not been about technology, it's been about how we do development. But for now, I don't see anything coming up. We seem to be doing really well.
There?
The thing is that I've been using Linux for some time right now, but I completely want to get rid of Windows, but that's not happening. The reason is that, for example, I'm using a Samsung mobile phone, and Samsung has their own application called Keys, which is for managing the mobile phone. But I don't find a Linux equivalent for that. This is the problem I face. So I have to go back to Windows to, for example, to update my phone or to save my contacts.
It has been a problem. My wife used to run an iPhone. Christ, that was painful for some of the same reasons. You needed to run iTunes just to sync anything. And she was so much happier when I finally just got her an Android phone, and she noticed, hey, I can do everything on the web. I don't need to do this whole synchronization part. It has been painful when certain things only come with drivers for Windows or applications to do. What I really personally dislike is hardware that comes with firmware upgrades, and the upgrade program is some stupid Windows program. I don't have Windows in my house anywhere, so I can't update the firmware on the hardware I have. And I'm just saying, okay, I need to stop buying that hardware. To some degree, Apple has actually helped this situation, because it turns out if you make Windows-only applications these days, Apple is big enough that it actually annoys people. So now certain vendors make Windows and Mac versions. But other vendors have just said, hey, we'll do upgrading through the web. So the fact that that Windows isn't 99% of the desktop market anymore has actually helped to some degree, has made it easier for Linux to be accepted too. But yeah, there are problem spots. I
hope those problems will be solved soon. Okay. I hope.
So again, from Screen.io. So you started Linux when you were a student at University of Helsinki, and I guess the question was that do you think that's the right time to start a big new project like Linux, or would it be better to do it on your free time when you are graduated from university, you might have your job, but then you kind of allocate your other resources to something like what you did? Was this the right time to start Linux?
I think it was. I think I had a lot of free time because it took me 8 years to graduate from Helsinki University, right? I was not exactly studying hard. I also think that quite often you have to be slightly ignorant of what you're doing to do something that if you knew more, you'd say, that's just stupid, that's too much work, I'll never get anything done. When you're a student at the university, you can just, hey, your choices between drinking beer or doing something fun with a computer. I did both, right? And it wasn't wasted time. It helped me with my studies. It was interesting, and it would be much harder to do something like Linux when I have a real job and kids and a real life. So I think, at least in the case of Linux, my university years were absolutely the right time to start doing it.
Yeah. Well, there was an earlier question, and I kind of guess your answer that well, of course, kind of the university system is trying now to force the students to graduate in a shorter amount of time, in 5 years and so forth. And what's your opinion on that trend?
I understand why you'd think that wasting 10 years of your life drinking is not a good thing for society. I have to say, I really enjoyed Helsinki University, and the fact that I only got a master's in 8 years of studying. I was, to me, very successful. I realized maybe most people don't do anything else productive at the same time. So there's a push to make people more efficient. I don't know. Enjoy it while you can is my suggestion. It's all good.
And it's not a bad time to start something big. Next.
Hi. Would you like to talk a little about your pet projects, or more in general, what other fields other than kernel development and Git would you like to get into or are getting into?
So the question was about my pet projects and other things I do outside of the kernel. The kernel is my main work. I mean, the kernel is where I use really all my time. Even if I don't program, it is what I do day in and day out. I do have a few projects I've worked on the side. Git was obviously something I did very actively 5 years ago. These days, I don't need to worry too much about Git because Git has a great maintainer, so I can just say whatever. Junio Hamana has been doing a great work at maintaining Git for the last 6+ years. So I don't get that involved in Git anymore. I occasionally send a patch just because I found something that Git didn't do quite right for my usage case. Another pet project I have is a program called Subsurface. I love scuba diving. Outside of, if I go on a vacation, I want to go on a vacation where there's warm water and colorful fish and corals, and I can go underwater and scuba dive. And it turns out there are no good scuba diving applications that run under Linux. So I wrote my own, and if there are any scuba divers in the audience, my co-maintainer, Dirk Hondel, just released the 2.1 version of Subsurface today, or was it yesterday? It depends on which time zone you're in. So I've had a few other projects that I work on, but they've been toy projects compared to the kernel.
Well, I guess it's now time for the last question, and
yes,
so time flies. We're in good company, and I'm actually taking it now from here. So, and this might be asking, you know, which one is your favorite child, but I won't ask that. So, what piece of Linux are you most proud of?
So I have to. I mean, there's parts of the kernel that I've been intimately involved with from a technical angle, and I really like the path name lookup. I think Linux does that better than anybody else. But at the same time, I think in the big picture, what's more important is we've had a great kernel community, and the fact that we've grown the community, I mean, thousands of people involved. And I'll take some credit for that.
Sure.
And that's more important than the code itself, is the fact that we have a very healthy and big development community where there are heated discussions at times, but I think people really do end up enjoying the kernel community a lot.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this discussion, and I hope you all join me in just, well, giving a big applause to Linus.